My name is Jacqueline Bhabha, and I'm a professor of the practice of health and human rights at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health and a lecturer at Harvard Law School and associate professor at the Kennedy School. And I'm here to talk about my recent book called Can We Solve the Migration Crisis? So people often ask me, what is the migration crisis? And my answer is that we actually have a acceptance crisis or a reception crisis or maybe even a compassion crisis. So in my book, I talk about this very long history of human migration. From the beginning of our species, people have migrated, and migration is really a fact of human life. I think the reason why people have this perception of a crisis is because our policies for receiving all sorts of different types of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, other types of migrants, are badly attuned to the needs that our countries have. I'm most concerned with what I call distress migration, that broad category of migration that covers people who are forced to leave their home. As a kind of global community, if you like, we have decided that we owe basic human support and human compassion to people who are fleeing persecution. And those are people who we call asylum seekers. But there is a much larger group of people who don't fall within the narrow legal definition, but who are still forced to leave home. And I argue in my book that we should address the needs of those people too, and that in many cases we aren't addressing those needs adequately. The main thesis of my book is, I think, a fairly simple one. It is that the answer to the question, can we solve the migration crisis, is yes, but. We can't solve it just by dealing with migration issues. We can't just build a wall. It's not going to work. We can't just ban Muslims. Not going to work. I argue that there are several big problems which contribute to the pressures to migrate. So the first is conflict. If you don't solve or address conflict, you're never going to address migration flows. Everybody is going to try to flee when their life is in danger. My second point is that another major contributor to distress migration is climate change. Unless we have a much more robust set of policies in place to address environmental refugees and their needs, we are going to be constantly surprised by arrivals of people. Thirdly, I think a dramatic factor precipitating migration is increasing global inequality. Within countries and between regions, there are growing disparities. And where you have enormous disparities in quality of life, it's only natural that people with any entrepreneurial instinct, with any ability to move, are going to try and move. And so that, again, is another precipitator of migration. I do make several policy recommendations in the book. You cannot have a viable and sustainable refugee policy if all the responsibility for new arrivals is very disproportionately concentrated in some communities and not at all present in others. And that's what we have at the moment. Communities that would be and have been hospitable and generous and open turn when they feel they're not getting any help. Then it becomes unsustainable. So the first policy recommendation is to find productive ways to encourage, incentivize, and ensure responsibility sharing. And that's a main burden of a lot of the creative thinking at the moment in the refugee field. I think people should read my book because it addresses a very important issue. It's a short book. It's only about 100 pages. It's not a scholarly book. It has very few footnotes. I think it's easily readable. And I would hope that most people are interested in a topic that creates such enormous suffering and has such a high visibility in our society today. I spent my life working on migration issues. I wrote this book because I really wanted to reach a broad audience, because I wanted people to think about how positive a force migration is and how much of a responsibility we all have as people, many of us who benefit from the countries that we live in and from the histories of those countries, how much of a responsibility we have to people who are far away, who have desperate needs that we think of as unconnected to our own lives, but that should be connected.